There are tons of elements that make a good horror story, the biggest one being whether or not it's a true story. Amityville is a small village on the north shore of Long Island, New York. However, if you type Amityville into Google, you'll need to scroll for a fair bit before finding the actual place. This is because since 1974, this small idyllic backdrop was the scene of one of the most gruesome murders in American history, the aftermath of which would spark countless documentaries, 12 books, and 28 movies. No joke, 28. Hi folks, I'm Johnny and welcome to The Oddest. In this video, we're diving into the facts of what happened one November night back in 1974. We're going to unravel the media frenzy that followed and uncover the truth of the infamous house in Amityville. (1974) Long Island, New York. In the small town of Amityville sat a 10,900 square foot plot of land, sporting a stunning family home complete with swimming pool, private dock and a boathouse. At 112 Ocean Avenue lived the DeFeo family. The 7 members of the family were Ronald DeFeo Sr. and his wife Louise, both of whom were 43 years old. The 5 children were Ronald DeFeo Jr., also known as Butch. He was 23 at the time. Dawn, 18, Allison, 13, Mark, 12, and the youngest was John, at 9 years old. At around 6:30 p.m. on the night of November 13th, 1974, Butch DeFeo would run into the local bar and scream for help. Someone had killed his parents. He and a small group of locals would immediately rush over to the DeFeo home, where they would make the gruesome discovery of Ronald Sr. and Louise. It appeared they had been shot in bed as they slept. One of the people that joined Butch that night was a friend of his called Joe. Joe immediately called 911 and police were soon in attendance. Once the cops arrived, the scene was something straight out of a horror movie. Not only did they find Butch's parents, but the entire DeFeo family had been massacred. Dawn, Allison, Mark and John had also been slain in their beds as they slept. All 6 of them were found to have been shot at around 3:15 a.m. and were all laying face down in their beds. Police investigations revealed that there were no signs of struggle and that there were no evidence of sedatives or drugs having been administered. Strangely though, the investigation also showed that the gun used to carry out these killings was not silenced in any way. So, after the first shot rang out, why didn't any of the family wake up? Police took Ronnie Jr., Butch, back to the police station to speak to him further. Whilst they were there, they would get his version of events, and of course they would ask the usual questions like, well, is there anyone that would want to harm you or your family? DeFeo told investigators that he believed a mafia hitman was responsible, so it was a good thing that Butch was now in the cop shop, at the very least for his own protection.
He came, he opened the door and he was screaming, "Come on, help me, somebody shot my mother and father." And everyone ran out of the bar and that was it. They all took off. No, I had to stay, I was tending bar. They all jumped in his car and took off.
Today, police combed the DeFeo's handsome 3-story house for clues while divers explored the backyard swimming pool for the still unfound murder weapon. Police have been questioning the son Ronald and now say he is being, quote, safeguarded. Investigators say without explanation that they now feel young DeFeo was in the house at the time of the murders, but they're not yet considering him a suspect. And so forth.
We have no suspect at this time. We have no indication of the motive at this time.
What about Ronald DeFeo, the son, the surviving son?
Ronald is being safeguarded by the Suffolk County Police at this time.
Why safeguarded?
Why? Because the 6 members of the family dead, and we don't know why, and he's the sole remaining member.
Is he also a suspect?
He's not a suspect at this time.
However, it wouldn't take long for Butch's statement to stop making sense, and in fact they found several inconsistencies. For a start, the alleged mafia hitman, Louis Fellini, was found to have an airtight alibi and was nowhere near the place on the night of the killing. So, what really happened? Well, it was fairly common knowledge that Ronald Sr. was fairly hostile, abusive and dominant towards the entire family. This would cause the oldest son, Butch, to develop into a troubled young adult, often rebelling against his father. Ronald Sr. owned an auto body shop where he employed Butch. But rather than going to work, Butch would constantly be hanging out at bars or just simply not turning up. This, of course, would be another area of contention between him and his father. Butch also suffered from alcohol and drug addiction. This led him to behavioural mood swings, and more often than not he would become violent towards the rest of the family. So, in the wee hours of November 13th, Butch would get home, get showered and dressed. As he glanced at the clock showing 3:15 AM, he raised his rifle and loaded it. Going from room to room, he systematically shot and killed his entire family. He then got washed up again, dressed for work, and attended the body shop. All of the next day, he would make mention to other folk that he's been trying to call home to his parents, but they're just not answering. His father didn't show up for work, which was very unlike him, and Butch feigned concern, knowing full well the reasons why. Two things that I want to point out here that may be considered strange is the fact that none of the family members woke up, even after the first shot was fired. Now remember, there was no silencer used on this weapon, and toxicology reports stated that there were no drugs detected in any of their systems. Butch himself would admit the entire thing to police the very next day, after being taken to the police station. He simply said, "Once I started, I just couldn't stop. It went so fast." He was charged with the murders, and whilst on trial, his defence team would enter a plea of insanity. He would claim that he heard demonic voices in the house telling him to kill them all. He claimed that a pair of demonic hands handed him the weapon to carry out these slayings. The prosecution hired a professional psychiatrist, who not only contested this, but also stated that Ronnie Jr. knew exactly what he was doing. 1 year later, Ronald DeFeo Jr. was found guilty of the murders of the family. The judge said that the murders were the most heinous killings to occur in Suffolk County since its founding, and in November of 1975, he sentenced DeFeo to 6 consecutive life sentences. Only 1 month after Butch was found guilty, a family would move into the DeFeo house. They wouldn't stay long. George and Kathy Lutz moved into the house with their 3 children in December of 1975, and after spending only 28 days living there, they fled, leaving all of their possessions inside, never to return. Of course, they got the property at a fantastic price, and they were well aware why. They knew of the murders and were asked by the realtor if this would be an issue. They decided it wouldn't be. After learning about the history of the house, a family friend advised the Lutzes to get a priest in just to give the house a wee blessing. Although they were not particularly religious, they figured, well, what harm could it do? So they got a local priest, Father Piccararo, over to go room to room and, bless it as he went. The Lutzes showed him the house and continued unpacking, leaving the priest to do his thing. As he entered one of the upstairs bedrooms, he started to sprinkle holy water when he heard a loud, masculine voice scream. The priest swiftly packed up his things and hastily left the property. Before he went, he told the Lutzes to stay out of that bedroom where he heard this demonic voice. The bedroom in question was once shared by Mark and John DeFeo. It was later reported that the priest developed blistering on his hands, similar to that of stigmata. What followed for the Lutz family was a symphony of paranormal activity that only seemed to increase until it finally forced them out of their home. At first the activity was fairly subtle, strange footsteps on floors where no one was, whispering and mumbling along with doors mysteriously slamming. The house was constantly freezing cold despite the furnace burning day and night. George Lutz would later say that he would actually see demonic faces forming in the flames of the fire. He also started to exhibit strange behaviours, becoming quick to anger and often verbally lashing out at his family. At first, this was all put down to lack of sleep, as George would awaken every night at the exact same time, 3:15 AM. The family would find a strange, slimy substance that appeared to run down some of the walls in the house and out of the keyholes. Things took an even creepier turn when 5-year-old Missy Lutz would be heard having conversations. Of course, this is not uncommon with kids play acting, but when asked about this, she insisted that she was speaking directly to another little girl that lives in the house called Jodie. More often than not, after hearing various noises and crashes in the house, George or Kathy would go to investigate and find that a window was damaged or a door was broken, even although there was no explanation as to how this could have happened. George would also later say that more than once he would find cloven hoofprints in the snow around his house. One night George was awoken, yet again at 3:15 AM, only this time he felt that he was paralysed as he lay there. He tried to turn to face his wife, only when he did, he said that her face seemed to change to that of an old hag. On another occasion, he said that he witnessed his wife levitating a foot off the bed whilst she slept. Eventually, enough was enough, and the family made the wise decision to get the hell out of Dodge. After spending only 28 days in the house, they were gone. After digging further into the history of the house, it was also discovered that the Shinnecock Indian tribe used that location as an insane asylum for the sick and dying members of the tribe. Like that old horror trope, the house was built on an Indian burial ground. A short time later, notable paranormal investigators and demonologist Ed and Lorraine Warren attended the Amityville home. If that name sounds familiar to you, that's because their life's work investigating these types of cases has been turned into a series of movies called The Conjuring. So the Warrens rock up to the house along with a television crew and a team of psychics and investigators, where they would perform a séance and other types of investigations. During one such séance, Lorraine Warren said that she encountered a very malevolent spirit and identified it as demonic. Cameras and audio equipment were positioned throughout the house. One of these cameras was set up covering an upstairs landing. During the investigation, the camera would intermittently snap photos, one of which has become the most famous photo in paranormal circles. Remember that the youngest of the DeFeo victims was 9-year-old John DeFeo. After all of this, a book was written about the entire event by author Jay Anson titled The Amityville Horror. The book was an international sensation and sold well over 6 million copies. Like most good stories, it was quickly made into a blockbuster movie of the same title, starring Margot Kidder and James Brolin. To this day, the Amityville house still stands, although the address has been changed to stop obsessed fans from disturbing the peace of the new owners. It's still one of the most famous haunted houses in the world. So, what's the truth then? As this video is purely about the Amityville house, I won't be delving too much into Ed and Lorraine Warren, although I might cover some of their other famous cases in future videos. If you would like a deeper look into them, then I will advise you to head over to the Why Files and check out his video on the couple. It's one of my favourite YouTube channels, and after you watch AJ, you'll see why. I'll leave a link below to his particular video, but don't click on it just yet, because we're not finished here. In 1973, a movie was released called The Exorcist. By the time the Lutz family had moved into 112 Ocean Avenue, the country and the world were deep in the thralls of haunted houses, demonic possession, and priests getting beaten up by evil. In the mind of George Lutz, there was an opportunity here. He contacted a publishing house called Prentice Hall and relayed his story with a view of getting a book written. The publisher was keen on this idea, as the public would eat it up. Enter author Jay Anson, who penned the novel, which, as I said at the start, would lead to several more books and an onslaught of movies. During the 28 days that the Lutzes were being plagued by the 7th circle of hell, the demonic forces took a night off to allow George and Kathy Lutz to take a meeting and drink some wine. They were meeting with a man called William Weber to discuss the goings-on at the property. Only Weber wasn't a paranormal investigator or a priest. He was Butch DeFeo's defence attorney. So, hang on a minute. So the Amityville house was haunted and infested with demons. Well, clearly that's what made Butch DeFeo kill his family, right? The Lutzes had an amazing story to tell, and Weber had a client that he needed to get off with murder. What transpired from that meeting was a mutual benefit to both men. See, the stories of the hauntings and all this scary stuff didn't come out until after the Lutzes left the house. The story of the haunting was concocted, based in part upon elements from The Exorcist. George Lutz stood to gain from the potential commerciality of a ghost story based upon the DeFeo murders, and Weber would have a new defence for his client, demons, as evidenced by the Lutzes' experience caused Butch DeFeo to murder his family. Well, at least in Butch's own mind. So, they had to get eyes on this thing, and the best way to do it was to get others involved. So they got a TV crew from Channel 5 along with a bunch of renowned psychics and paranormal investigators. two of which were the Warrens. Now, during the actual investigations, there was nothing really uncovered. There was no hard proof at all, just the start of a trend of overly popular paranormal investigations, the likes of which we see constantly on TV and YouTube, where a strange whisper could be heard or a shuffling noise is instantly attributed directly to that of a ghost. Clearly. But wait, I hear you. What about that photo of the demonic kid on the landing? That's real, right? Well, yeah, the photo is real, and it is super creepy. That's a photo of one of the investigators setting up the equipment. His name is Paul Bartz, and the demonic glow from his eyes is nothing more than the flash reflecting off his glasses. But wait a minute, what about the house's history? The Shinnecock Indians were using that property long before the DeFeos and the Lutzes. Well, no they weren't. At all. At the time, the nearest Shinnecock settlement was over 70 miles away. When asked, even the Shinnecocks said it was complete nonsense. The priest that attended and was forced out would also later say that he actually found the house rather pleasant and peaceful and was not attacked. As a result of this, the author of the book, Jay Anson, created another priest who attended the house and subsequently got yelled at by demons and developed blisters on his hands. None of the doors and windows were ever found to be damaged. The family that moved into the house after the Lutzes said that all of the original fixtures in the house still had their original hinges and mountings without any damage. It was also mentioned in the book that due to the theatrical demonic events in the house, that it also affected, close by neighbours, and the police were called on various occasions. This too was entirely made up for the book. There are no records from the local PD that they ever had to attend the location during the Lutzes' 28-day stay at the property. What about the cloven hoof prints that George saw appearing in the snow around the house? Well, during their stay at the property, it didn't even snow in Suffolk County. So with the Lutzes and Weber's collusion, they were able to make money from the book, movie deals and other financial endeavours. Weber was able to mount a defence for Butch DeFeo based on all of this. Thankfully though, the presiding judge was having none of it and referred to the book as nothing but pure fiction. And he was locked up for life. He never saw 1 cent from the lucrative deals accrued from the stories of his former family home. Ronald DeFeo Jr. would die in prison on the 21st of March in 2021 at the age of 69. Now, I've read the Amityville Horror, and I have to say, it's a good scary story, save from the words on the cover that says it's a true story. Taken on its own merit, I would say it's a good read, although I was young at the time and I still slept with the light on. Needless to say, a horrendous, horrible crime took place when Ronnie DeFeo murdered his entire family. Sadly, it was all overshadowed by another horrible crime when a defence attorney and a desperate man got together to milk an already sad situation. That brings us to the end of this video, folks. I really appreciate you, and I appreciate you spending the time to watch any of my content. Please stay safe out there, and as always, keep smiling.